Think about the last time someone asked you for a favor you didn't want to do. Maybe it was a coworker dumping their work on you, a friend asking for money, a family member expecting you to drop everything. And even though every part of you wanted to say no, what came out of your mouth was yes. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not just being nice. What's actually happening inside your mind is far more complex, far more deeply rooted, and far more psychologically significant than simple politeness. Because the inability to say no isn't a personality quirk. It's a psychological pattern. And understanding where it comes from might be the most important thing you ever learn about yourself. Let's start at the beginning. Nobody is born afraid to say no. Children are actually remarkably good at it. Watch any toddler and you'll see someone with zero hesitation refusing what they don't want. The inability to say no is learned. It's conditioned into us usually early, usually by the environments and people we depended on most. For many people who struggle with saying no, the roots trace back to childhood dynamics where love or approval felt conditional. Where keeping the peace was survival. Where being agreeable meant being safe. When a child grows up in an environment, whether that's a household, a classroom, or a social group, where expressing needs or setting boundaries led to conflict, withdrawal of affection, or punishment, the brain learns a very clear lesson. Your needs are dangerous. Other people's comfort is more important than your own. That lesson gets carried into adulthood, and it shows up every single time someone struggles to say two simple letters. The psychological term that sits at the heart of this pattern is called fawn response. Most people know about fight, flight, and freeze as responses to threat or stress. But there's a fourth one that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Fawning is the tendency to appease, to please, to make yourself as agreeable and non-threatening as possible in order to avoid conflict or negative consequences. It was first identified as a trauma response, a coping mechanism developed by people who learned that the safest way to navigate a threatening situation was to become whatever the other person needed them to be. People who can't say no are often chronic fawners. And for them, saying yes isn't a free choice. It's an automatic, anxiety-driven response designed to keep them emotionally safe. Here's what that looks like in the body. When a people pleaser is put on the spot and asked for something they don't want to give, they don't experience it as a simple social moment. They experience something close to threat. Their heart rate increases. Their mind races through worst-case scenarios: rejection, anger, disappointment, conflict. The anxiety that floods them in that moment is so uncomfortable, so urgent, that saying yes becomes the fastest way to make it stop. The agreement isn't generosity, it's relief. And the painful irony is that this relief is temporary. Because saying yes when you mean no doesn't actually resolve the anxiety. It delays it. The resentment builds quietly. The exhaustion accumulates. The sense of having no control over your own life grows heavier and heavier, until people pleasers often find themselves burned out, frustrated, and surrounded by relationships that feel fundamentally one-sided. There's another psychological force at work here too, and it's one of the most powerful motivators in human behavior. It's called the need for external validation. People who struggle to say no have often never fully developed what psychologists call an internal locus of self-worth. In simple terms, they don't feel okay about themselves by themselves. Their sense of being good enough, likable enough, valuable enough, it depends on constant confirmation from other people. Saying yes is a way of collecting that confirmation. Every time someone responds warmly to their agreement, there's a brief hit of relief. Every time they imagine someone being disappointed or upset with them, it feels like evidence of their own unworthiness. This is why simply telling a people pleaser to just say no is so ineffective. You're not dealing with a habit. You're dealing with someone whose entire sense of self is tangled up in other people's reactions to them. Changing that isn't a matter of willpower. It's a matter of rebuilding something that was never properly constructed in the first place. There's also a deeply distorted belief system underneath all of this that almost never gets examined. People who can't say no tend to operate on a set of unconscious assumptions that their needs matter less than everyone else's. That conflict is dangerous and must be avoided at all costs. That being liked and being respected are the same thing. That setting a boundary will inevitably destroy a relationship. These beliefs feel like facts to the person holding them. They don't feel like beliefs at all, which makes them extraordinarily difficult to challenge. And here's something that rarely gets talked about. People pleasers are often some of the most quietly angry people in any room, because every yes that should have been a no is a small act of self-betrayal, and those acts accumulate. They stack up into a deep, wordless frustration that has nowhere healthy to go. It doesn't come out as direct confrontation that would require exactly the kind of conflict they've spent their whole life avoiding. Instead, it leaks out sideways, in passive aggression, in withdrawing, emotionally, in sudden explosions over something small that was never really about the small thing at all. The people around them often feel confused by this because on the surface, this person is always so agreeable. What they don't see is the invisible ledger being kept underneath. And here's the thing about those relationships people pleasers are so desperately trying to protect. Research consistently shows that chronic people pleasing doesn't actually create deeper connection. It creates the opposite. When you never say no, people stop seeing you as a full human being with your own interior life. They see a resource, someone who's always available, always agreeable, always accommodating. The relationships that grow out of that dynamic are built on a version of you that isn't real, and somewhere underneath all the yeses, the people pleaser knows it. That knowledge is its own quiet kind of loneliness. So what does healing actually look like? It starts with a recognition that saying no is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of honesty. And real relationships, the ones worth having, can handle honesty. In fact, they require it. Every time a person who struggles with boundaries manages to say no and the world doesn't end, their nervous system gets a small piece of evidence that contradicts everything it was taught. That's how the pattern slowly begins to change. Not through a single dramatic moment of boundary setting, but through hundreds of small, uncomfortable, courageous moments of choosing their own truth over someone else's comfort. It also means sitting with the discomfort of possibly disappointing someone and surviving it, because the fear of disappointment is almost always worse than the disappointment itself. Most people, when they hear a calm and honest no, adjust and move on. The catastrophic fallout that the people pleaser's brain has been predicting their entire life rarely arrives. And every time it doesn't, something shifts. Slowly, the nervous system begins to learn a new lesson, one it should have been taught long ago, that you can hold your ground and still be loved, that your limits don't make you a burden, that taking up space is not something you need to apologize for. Learning to say no is ultimately about learning to believe something radical, that you are worthy of taking up space, that your needs are not a burden, that the people who genuinely care about you will not leave because you have limits, and that the word no, delivered calmly and without apology, is one of the most powerful sentences in the human language. Did you enjoy the video? If so, a thumbs up goes a long way. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. See you soon.